Good morning. Welcome to Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room. The Orbit 2 team of flight controllers is on console here, helping the Expedition 57 crew members with the tasks on their agenda today and monitoring the operations of all of the space station systems. In the past week, the space station has seen the arrival of a new shipment of supplies and a spacewalk by 2 cosmonauts. Next week, half of the station crew will head for home. We now know which crew members will be coming to take their places on orbit next year.
Houston Station on Space to Ground.
Welcome to Space to Ground. I'm Leah Cheshire. An astronaut and cosmonaut previously destined for the International Space Station have a new launch date. On October 11th, Nick Hague of NASA and Alexei Ovchinin of Roscosmos returned to Earth in a ballistic descent after a second-stage booster failed to properly separate from their Soyuz rocket. On December 3rd, Hague and Ovchinin were assigned to join NASA's Christina Koch on her first mission to the International Space Station.
I'm excited to have the chance to launch with a fellow classmate, and it's going to be really thrilling to get my first mission to the station and be able to share it with Christina.
I feel also very grateful that Nick and Alexei have welcomed me into their crew with open arms, and we've had a chance to begin our training together, and so we just really feel ready to kind of pursue that goal together.
2 Russian cosmonauts ventured outside the station this week for a 7-hour, 45-minute spacewalk. Cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Oleg Kononenko examined the external hull of the Soyuz MS-09 spacecraft, currently docked to the International Space Station. This continues an investigation into the hole found on the Soyuz in August, which resulted in a pressure leak. Crew members quickly repaired the leak, and the station has since maintained a steady pressure and poses no threat to the crew. Kononenko and Prokopyev took samples of epoxy residue on the hull and captured images of the area for further analysis. On December 8th, the SpaceX Dragon resupply craft arrived at the station. After being captured by Commander Alexander Gerst and NASA astronaut Serena Auñón-Chancellor, teams on the ground used the Canadarm2 to berth the spacecraft to the Harmony module. This specific Dragon visited the station once before on SpaceX's 10th resupply mission. Dragon delivered science experiments, crew supplies, and more, along with treats like candied yams and Christmas cookies in honor of the upcoming holiday. Keep sending in your questions using the hashtag #SpaceToGround. We'll see you next week.
Well, next week, the International Space Station's Expedition 57 will come to an end when Commander Alex Gerst and flight engineers Sergei Prokopyev and Serena Auñón-Chancellor undock in their Soyuz spacecraft Wednesday evening, head for a landing in Kazakhstan late Wednesday night U.S. time. This is the first spaceflight of Auñón-Chancellor's career, one she trained for with the help of some spaceflight analog missions that she says were very important in getting her ready to fly.
The astronaut office uses a lot of extreme environments to help us train for the space station. So it's no accident that a lot of us are members on a NEMO mission prior to going to the space station. NEMO, and I was fortunate to dive with Luca Parmitano, who had already flown on board the space station at that point. He was our commander for the NEMO mission. During that 2 to 2.5 week mission underwater, a couple times I asked Luca, is this environment that we live in, is it reminiscent of station? And he said, this is just like living on station. He goes, we have a mission control on ground that we deal with every day, talk to multiple times a day. We have a timeline we need to follow. He's like, even the running sounds of a fan inside the habitat underneath the water, the background noise that's always there, he says, is very much like station. We would do aqua walks or spacewalks, but we had to don all of our protective gear and do checks, and then we'd be outside the habitat doing dives for 3 to 4 hours at a time. So he said this is one of the best environments that he'd ever seen. Antarctica was interesting because Antarctica, I think, is more isolated, much more so than station. So I was there to help collect meteorites, and So I was the lone physician with a bunch of PhDs in geology or lunar geology, Martian geology. I mean, these were all specialists in their field, and it's, Sesame Street. Which one of these is not like the other? That would be me. But funny enough, these folks we all came together and they taught me, how to find meteorites in the field. When meteorites re-enter the atmosphere and come towards Earth, they form a fusion crust from re-entry. And if you have the sun come over your shoulder at just the right angle, you'll see it glisten right off the surface. And so we would drive our snowmobiles around just using our naked eyeball, no special tools, to find those meteorites. Antarctica, you are very much at that pointy tip of the spear. And you learn a lot about yourself. You learn what's important when you're kind of in an isolated environment. Things like communication from home, exercise on a daily basis. These are all the things that are parts of good behavioral health during an expedition. So yes, absolutely valuable. I'm Serena Onan Chancellor, and I'm an astronaut.
As Leah mentioned a moment ago, the next crew members to launch to the station include the two who didn't get there in October due to the Soyuz launch abort. That launch abort puts a spotlight on the value to the International Space Station program of having a second way to get crews to orbit, and that is exactly a goal of NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Space Agency is working with Boeing and SpaceX as they progress toward their upcoming first flight tests of the Boeing Starliner and the SpaceX Crew Dragon.
So we're going to have an orbital flight test, a test without the crew in it of each vehicle, and then we're going to have the first flight with crew in them to prove that these systems are ready to fly people to space.
These demonstration missions are important for astronaut safety because, the folks around here that I work with, we all ask ourselves, would we be comfortable flying our own family on board this vehicle? And the answer has to be yes. And so because of that, we need to make sure we test these as much as we can.
Since we're dealing sort of with a new generation of people who are putting human space vehicles together again, I think it's important to impress upon them every day that there is not a day where their attention can waver.
We can test them down here on Earth. We can put them in vacuum chambers and acoustic chambers and, do thermal tests on them. But there's nothing like going up and putting them in the real environment.
That will give us a lot of insight on the vehicle performance, the functional systems, even the abort system will be active on that vehicle.
So that's why these initial test flights are so important, is because you need to see it's not just the hardware, it's also the software, it's the people, it's the procedures, it's the whole thing coming together.
Boeing's supposed to land on land, SpaceX is supposed to land in water. Those are two hugely different environments, so there's a little bit of interest in the survival equipment that's located in the spacecraft as well, where that's going to be, how that's going to work.
This is a really critical aspect of the NASA job, is to continue to have that dialogue with the contractors about, well, why did you do that? Why was that safer?
This is someone's family member, husband, wife, uncle, aunt. It's not an option to not be successful. We have to be successful.
Did you ever see a cancer experiment up close? Well, you're about to. Recently, flight engineer Serena Onan Chancellor turned on a camera while she was working with the Angie-X cancer therapy experiment in the International Space Station's Destiny Laboratory module so that we could see what she was doing as she grew and examined endothelial cells. Now, those are important components of the human body's blood supply system. Scientists want to know if the cells that are grown in space can improve the testing methods for drugs which are aimed at choking off the blood supply of cancerous tumors in the body.
Hey, good morning and welcome to ISS. Today I am working on the Angie-X cancer trials up here on ISS. We've actually spent quite a bit of time working on this. And what we're looking at here is something called an endothelial cell. And an endothelial cell, you find these cells in every blood vessel in your body. And so people wonder why we're growing these cells up on ISS. And scientists believe that cells in the body grow very similar up here on ISS. A lot of times scientists try and grow these endothelial cells in the ground and they don't live for very long. And they think for some reason they grow better up here in space. And that's one of the things we're testing on orbit here. And you can see some of these cells right here on the computer. So why is this important? Well, endothelial cells help form blood supply. And tumors need blood supply to get bigger and bigger. And all of us have had someone impacted by cancer, whether it's a family member or a friend. And so we're always thinking, how can we fight this cancer? Well, one thing we're looking at is, can we grow these cells on orbit to test new cancer drugs to prevent that blood supply from growing? And if we can stop that tumor blood supply from growing, then we can help beat that cancer. So that's just one of the science experiments we're looking at here on the space station. This is where all the cells live in their biocell habitat. And when we're done working with them, we put them in something called Sable 2, which is up in the ceiling for ISS. And it feels all nice and warm and comfortable, because it is, because it's just like the temperature of the human body. And so we let the cells live and grow there, and we've had them for almost 2 months now up here on ISS. We feed them, we give them nutrients, and they basically live. They're like miniature crew members living with us. So we're going to this new biocell, which is Delta 7. And these biocells here have been treated with varying levels of a cancer chemotherapy drug that is being tested out here on ISS. And so we are looking at the cells, the researchers look at the images that I take for them on the microscope to see how well that drug is impacting the connection between those endothelial cells, to see if it will stop this tumor blood supply from growing. Make sure that's level.
Same position, so Forrest and spaceflight are at the leftmost position for the first image.
Yeah, you can see some of these tubule formations here also.
A good spot.
Yeah, I agree, it's a good spot. You do see definitely some of the tubule formations here and some of the gaps in between the cells.
Really good representation of both of those. That's a really good spot.
Earlier this year, a cargo delivery to the International Space Station brought the multi-use variable gravity platform that's designed for research involving a lot of different kinds of organisms and cell types. But it's especially important for fruit fly research. It'll allow researchers to study larger sample sizes than before and support fly colonies for multiple generations.
We're looking to answer the question, what is the effect of spaceflight on the host here being the fruit fly or Drosophila, and also on a pathogen. So the bacteria actually is one that can infect the fly very similarly to the way it would infect, for example, a human or any other organism. The genetic makeup of the fruit fly is actually very similar to humans. If you took the human genome and you looked at all the genes that you know are important for function, in that category, in that library of genes, there's 75% similarity between the human genes and the fruit fly genes. In a box this size, thousands of flies can be flown and brought back, so that even if you see an important difference that is small, you can get statistically significant data because you get 3,000 flies or 4,000 flies coming back in a box that size. We have a very nice new piece of hardware. The company TechShot, we've been working together with them for the last few years in developing a very capable piece of hardware.
What's so special about the TechShot MVP is really that there are two internal carousels inside the unit, and each one of them can produce anywhere from 0 to 2 Gs. So it'll be the only payload of its kind in the US segment that can do this. The sample modules themselves do transport to and from the station in the cargo vehicles, but the payload itself, the locker, stays on board the station permanently.
We are interested in human exploration. We want to go to Moon, we want to go to Mars, we want to explore the environment outside of low Earth orbit. And to do that, we need the help of these surrogate model organisms, because once we understand the genes and the pathways, then we know what the countermeasures are that we're working towards.
Robotic technology, originally designed for the International Space Station, has found a new application in healthcare. It's part of a telerobotic technology to provide MRI-guided breast biopsies to women in remote areas. The Canadian Space Agency contributed to the production of this feature about innovations coming from the Centre for Surgical Invention and Innovation in Hamilton, Ontario.
Hi, my name is Ricky Arnold on the International Space Station. We get asked a lot, how do we sleep in space? And it's a great question because we all know how important a good night's sleep is. If you're not getting a good night's sleep, you can count on reduced cognitive function, poorer reaction times, and maybe just being a little grumpy. And up here in space, just like on Earth, those are things we all want to avoid. So, we go around the Earth about every 90 minutes, which means we get 16 sunrises and sunsets a day. So how we sleep is a really good question, because the sun's always getting ready to come up or it's getting ready to set, and we use those cues on Earth to let us know when it's time to begin our day and when it's time to end our day.
Ricky is talking about circadian rhythm. It's the body's natural regulator for sleep and wake cycles based on a 24-hour schedule. Those 16 sunrises and sunsets he mentioned can cause circadian misalignment and sleep deficiencies during long-duration spaceflight. The hazards of lost sleep can range from poor attention at school to on-the-job errors to long-term sleep loss, even chronic disease. Sleep is super important. Hey Ricky, what are you doing on the space station to get some sleep?
Well, here in space, we kind of have to do it artificially. So we have these nice crew quarters. It's about the size of a refrigerator. It's very quiet. The space station can be a little noisy, but it's very quiet in here. And we can control light with a light switch. If we are just middle of the day, we have a light like you're seeing right now, which is just this kind of standard lighting. It's getting close to the end of the evening. You want to dim the light a little bit, kind of for the end of the evening. Or if you're going to be up late, you need to keep awake, we have a really bright light setting. The other thing we have is off. You see how dark it got. Another challenge sleeping on the International Space Station, sleeping in microgravity is really nice because you can just float and stretch out and it's really comfortable. The problem is with the air currents in the International Space Station, you could very well float into a piece of hardware and hit your head, or worse yet, even break something. So we got our sleeping bag here, just almost like a sleeping bag on Earth. But as you can see, we have bungee cords that help hold us up against the wall, so I almost sleep standing up. And also, I do have a pillow. It's just a bag full of clothes, but I actually keep it up on the top of my head because I'm a little tall. In the crew quarters, I tend to hit my head on the ceiling when I'm sleeping. So I got my sleeping bag here. I got my bungee cords to hold me in. And then when it's time to go to bed, it's quite easy. Just unzip the sleeping bag, climb on under the bungee cord, climb into the sleeping bag, make sure you're nice and secure, zip yourself up, plan on getting a good night's sleep so I have good reaction times, my cognitive ability is what it should be, and that I'm not grumpy in the morning. So with that, I'm all set. Good night from the ISS.
Ricky Arnold talking about some of the problems of sleeping in space and how astronauts overcome it. But now let's look at some robotic technology developed for the space station that's having a new application in healthcare.
Space represents a fairly harsh environment. Any piece of equipment that's exposed to it over a long period of time would require maintenance.
So every time we have to do a maintenance on the outside of the space station, that means a crew member has to suit up and go outside. That introduces that crew member to risk and puts that person in harm's way. The other issue is that now they're spending the time doing the maintenance work, and they're not doing the science, which is really what their purpose is. So with the maintenance challenges that we were going to have with the International Space Station, what we found ourselves was Canada being in the position to provide a solution to that problem, and Dexter was going to be that solution.
Dexter is a two-armed robotic manipulator system capable of performing fine motion tasks to replace what an astronaut would need to do on the exterior part of the space station.
Dexter is essentially a handyman. It operates on the outside of the International Space Station. It allows us to do maintenance operations. One of the advantages with Dexter is that we're able to control it from the ground.
And so the ground crew could actually operate these robotic systems and free the astronaut up from that task as well.
So now that Dexter is online on the space station and operating on a regular basis, what we've got a crew who's spending more time doing science. And this is important because this was really the whole idea of building the International Space Station, was to be able to do science in low Earth orbit.
Unfortunately, only about 40% of women who should be getting annual MRI as part of their screening undergo MR screening. Part of the reason why women were not undertaking MRI screening was because of lack of access to the best radiologists locally.
Some women have to drive very long distance, like 7 or 8 hours of car, in snowstorm during the winter, sometimes risking their lives just to get their MR-guided breast biopsies.
When we started to do the research with Canadian Space Agency and NASA on the whole remote telesurgery, we started to get involved with MDA. MDA is a Canadian company which has been involved in manufacture of all the robotic systems which is currently used on the space station.
So we developed a system called IGAR, which stands for Image Guided Automated Robot.
IGAR is a tele-operated robot that performs breast biopsies under MRI guidance.
One of the capabilities of IGAR is to be controlled by radiologists from any distance. And that allows basic A radiologists to supervise MR breast biopsy on a patient who may be hundreds of kilometers or thousands of kilometers away from them. It means that the patient can undergo their breast biopsy in their own local hospital without having the need to travel to another city or another hospital to get access to the expertise.
And the results are very, very encouraging. So we've demonstrated that the IGAR is safe, extremely accurate as a human.
And this will allow us to hopefully increase the number of people undergoing screening close to 100% where it should be. So IGAR is built on many of the know-how which was developed for the space program, as well as the software which is also used to control the robotics on the space station.
We can actually see some of these technologies we worked with for a long time becoming available. We have a lot of insight on how to apply them, not just in medicine, but in a number of other fields, which is what we're doing. So without the space station, would any of that have happened? No, not really. Not in that way, anyway.
The laboratories on the International Space Station are not the only part of the vehicle that supports science. There are several experiments on the outside of the station, including the Total and Spectral Solar Irradiance Sensor. It's continuing NASA's decades-long research, gathering important data for scientists who are investigating changes to Earth's climate.
Follow the sun. Presented by Science at NASA. The sun. It inspires songs, warms us, and grows our food. Life on land and in the oceans, the daily weather, and long-term climate patterns happen primarily because of the energy we receive from our closest star. Even tiny variations in that energy can affect the workings of our planet's atmosphere. NASA uses instruments to follow the sun and monitor the amount of solar energy coming to us. The latest instrument to do so, the Total and Spectral Solar Irradiance Sensor, TSIS-1, makes those measurements with unprecedented accuracy. TSIS gathers information from its perch aboard the International Space Station, or the ISS. Flying on the platform that the orbiting laboratory provides has allowed TSIS to continue NASA's 40-year record of tracking the sun's radiant energy, one of the longest and most important climate data records gathered from space. Over the past several decades, Earth's ice mass has diminished, sea levels have risen, drought and precipitation patterns have changed, and growing seasons have shifted. To understand the causes, including human influences, of these changes, and to refine the models used to simulate Earth's climate, researchers must know the amount of incoming solar energy. Peter Paluski, TSIS lead mission scientist, explains, when there's a balance between incoming energy from the sun and the infrared radiation Earth emits, climate remains steady. An imbalance means energy is either being stored in the system, causing temperature increases, or lost, causing temperature decreases. Energy from the sun makes up half of the balance equation. Even though the measurement record shows that the sun's solar energy output has not had a major influence in recent climate change, that output needs to be monitored continuously. It is arguably the most important variable we need to know to understand climate, says Paluski. Trying to understand climate without measuring the sun's input is like trying to balance your checkbook without knowing your income. Climate is measured over long time spans, decades to centuries and longer, unlike weather that changes over small time scales. To be able to connect measurements over long time periods, continuity and accuracy are key. TSIS has two sensors. The Total Irradiance Monitor, as its name suggests, measures all of the radiant energy from the sun, and the Spectral Irradiance Monitor measures how that energy is distributed over ultraviolet, visible, and infrared wavelengths. The latter helps scientists understand where in the atmosphere solar energy is being absorbed. For example, TSIS spectral irradiance measurements of the sun's ultraviolet radiation are critical to understanding the ozone layer. Ozone in the stratosphere absorbs ultraviolet light. This heats the stratosphere and drives changes in atmospheric wind flow that can propagate down to the lower atmosphere and impact climate. So many factors influence Earth's climate, says Paluski. We need to continue learning how they all interact. TSIS is helping us characterize the sun's behavior and how Earth's atmosphere responds to the sun. For more science from the International Space Station, go to www.nasa.gov/ISS-science. To continue following our closest star, visit science.nasa.gov.
If you'd like to get another look at any of the stories we featured today, check us out on YouTube and on Facebook. And while you're at those locations, look at all the other cool stuff you can find about NASA and America's human spaceflight program. And while you're out there on the internet, check out Houston. We have a podcast. That's folks here at NASA talking about their work in all aspects of space exploration. The new episodes post on Fridays. Today, Gary Jordan talks with Matt Lemke of the Orion program about how that new spacecraft's being built to withstand the radiation environment of deep space. You can go to nasa.gov/podcasts, find today's episode. You can also find the full library of all the NASA podcasts there. And you can listen to any or all of them on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. This is Mission Control, Houston.